I had this perspective the deal was going to close right away.
This house was not in a super desirable area, but the margins looked so good.
And I'm like,
I think within about 3 weeks, we had purchased 3 properties.
I remember feeling pretty conflicted.
It's still challenging.
Today, once again, I have my amazing friend, Ron, who's a fellow entrepreneur.
This isn't working right now. We want to make it work. Here are the parameters.
Take that experience and then compare it to the first experience, like look at your guys' progress.
We've gotten better at this over the years, but it's still challenging.
What's up, diehards? Welcome back to the podcast. Today, once again, I have my amazing friend, Ron, who's a fellow entrepreneur. If you listen to this episode, you will remember him as the guy who left his tech job. He is also helping me out with this podcast. So he's one of the people on our team here that helps get this to you weekly. Him and I were talking about firsts and thought it would be awesome to do an episode where we talk about some of our firsts. You know, Ron, one of the things that I've realized is anytime I'm doing something for the first time, really, I think for me, the biggest benefit is just the process and what I'm going to learn. Once you do something and you get over that hump, like it's like, boom, all of a sudden you get that confidence. All of a sudden you're looking to like this whole new area, whether it's like a first hire or a first deal. Like you and I both do real estate, right? So, you know, that first deal is like the big one. Anybody who I looked to as a mentor when I was first getting into real estate, they were like, man, it doesn't matter if you lose money, you make money. You just got that first one under your belt. And, you know, I think looking back, and I'm sure, Ron, you know, when you're coaching, you're talking about this too with some of your students, but really you're in that pivotal moment where it's like, there's so many things that you need to learn. Like, everywhere you look, every corner you turn, there's something to learn. And there's way more things that are working against you mentally, you know, fear, all that you just need to get that person to move forward and take action so that they can sort of see the proof for themselves and then continue taking action. And so, at least for me, that's what I was thinking about when I was thinking about the power of firsts and, you know, again, getting that first deal or selling that first client. You know, on another show, I had a guest that was talking about the first sell that she had done to somebody not in her family, right? It like broke down some serious beliefs on her thing being real. So today, I don't think you've heard this story from me. I'm pretty excited to share it with you. One of my first deals that I did, I'll call it like direct to seller. So the way I think about this is like my first was when I first got into real estate, 2021, 2022, like I'd done deals, but similar to my previous guest, like I was like, man, I want to produce my own marketing. And then I want my own marketing to draw in a natural customer. And I want it to be off market, not on the MLS. And then I want to close them and I want to provide them value and like all those things. That was like the real raw skills to me, right? And as you and I both know, not always, but a lot of times, those are really your best deals, right? Like the most margin. So there's also a little bit of that allure for me. So this was, as I had joined, you and I both joined the 7-Figure Flipping Mastermind. As I joined that mastermind, I really wanted to do that. And so that's the story that I'm going to tell today, that first. And so during this time, I'm trying to decide what type of marketing am I going to do, right? And I chose direct mail, right? Which you and I both know isn't always cheap. I'm new to this. I'm trying to figure out like who to talk to, how I'm going to talk to them, how I'm going to even like get their property under contract, and then how I'm going to sell it because I got to, you know, make some money off of it. What value I'm going to provide to them. Like, man, I was drowning in new information. But I think the important thing was I would just take it in bits and pieces and implement and keep moving forward. And so I'm at this point where I've spent like $15,000 to be into this mastermind. I spent like $15,000 in mail already. And so from my perspective, I'm like 30K in the hole. Okay. And I'm sending out mail and I'm just like, trust the process, trust the process, trust the process. And dude, finally my phone starts ringing, and it starts ringing more consistent. And so I've got like, I'm having conversations and I'm like looking at these, I'm trying to look at these small ones. I'm like, okay, well, my phone wasn't ringing before. Like now I'm actually talking to true customers, right? And they're mentioning my mailers and things like that. And so I'm like getting excited. And man, I remember it was a Saturday morning, and I'm sitting on the couch. It's funny how you remember certain things, right? Like I've done a lot of deals. I know you have as well. Not a lot of them stick out vividly, but so this one does. And like the call comes in, and I remember the call comes in and the guy just sounds like hot as crap. And he says something to the effect of like, hey, do you buy houses? And I say, yeah. Hey, I just got your postcard. I think I'm in big trouble. I need to sell. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, and I just jump into it. Well, give me the address. And I start pounding him with questions. And he's like giving me the answers. And I'm like, I'm running through my checklist. Like, am I getting the information right? Like, am I figuring this out? And I ask him what's going on. And he's like, oh, well, hey, let me give you a call back. And then he hangs up. And I'm like, and so I kind of waited out and I run it by my wife. And I'm like, I think I should call him back. Should I text him? What should I do? And she's like, yeah, text him. So I text him back and don't get nothing. Then he texts me back and he's like, hey, I got tied up. I'll call you a little later. And then I started talking to my wife and I'm like, almost immediately, I'm saying this as a tactician. I'm like, hey, you're like really, really good at talking with people. You really like build good rapport. You're like soft. Maybe you should handle these calls, And she's like, yeah, I do better than you. She was like smack talking me. And I was like, maybe you should, like, do you think maybe, I just had this belief that maybe like her voice would be more soothing or like, I don't know. So I'm like, okay, well, you're going to answer it when he calls back. So then he calls back, she answers it, and she has a good conversation with him, but doesn't progress anything any further. But I'm just thankful we got him back on the phone. So almost immediately, I had this perspective of that deal was going to close right away. And I'm realizing like, oh, dude, no way. This is going to take some time. So we go back and forth. It progresses for, I don't know, maybe like 7-10 days. And finally gets to the point where I get an appointment set with him. And I'm just like, man, I'm so stoked. So I do all the pre-work planning, everything for this appointment. And I'm looking at everything. And I realized the house was in foreclosure, but I didn't really go deep into that. He had mentioned it. Like, I just knew he needed help. So I go over there. Dude, this was a 6-hour appointment. So I spent 6 hours at his house. And like at that time, the time went by fast because I was willing to do anything. Like I was like, dude, I think reality kind of hit me. And I was like, man, this is really exciting. But like, I'm going to help this guy out and get a contract or I'm not. And in hindsight, I think that really helped me because I sort of lost the commission, Brad. And I lost like that, like, I wasn't like leaning on hope. I was like, I'll just show up and see if there's anything I can do. And if I can, I can. If I can, I can. So he told me the whole story and he says, man, I'm sorry I hung up on you. I got scared originally. And he's like, because I don't know what I'm doing. He's like, I've been getting these notices forever and I don't pay attention to them. He's like, things are going off with my family, yada, yada. And he's like, your postcard was underneath the notice that my house was going to auction. So he had been getting these delinquency notices and like all this stuff. Dude, he gets a sheet that says, hey, your house is going to auction 4 Fridays from now. And right below it's my card. And so it's really, really good, So he calls me and then I'm sort of like, well, he's at this point where he's like, I don't want to sell. And he's like, I'm a veteran. I will stay there and they're going to remove me. And I'm like, oh, well, they will do that. They will, eventually get to the point where the sheriff, I didn't know a lot about foreclosures, but I sort of knew the process. I was like, they'll have the sheriff come and like physically remove you, man. And I think that's a lot of what the 6 hours took was like him realizing like he doesn't have any option. Like he had 0 options on the table at that point, but to sell. So got him to agree to hit. And we got a really decent price. I think he wanted like $10,000 in his pocket. The house was tore up, man. He had dogs. He had 6 dogs living in there. I remember it was kind of you could tell he'd been living by himself for a while. And the situation, I kind of had this feeling I didn't have all the details. Like, I remember this one pivotal moment where I was like, okay, I need to ask him better questions, because I walked out the back door. I turned around and you have, a neighbor's house, and that neighbor's house, the end of that neighbor's house had a window, and in the corner of the window, there was a camera pointed directly down at his back door. Like, you could just tell, like, this wasn't a security camera that was properly mounted, where it should be. Like, this was deliberately put there to watch his back door. And like as he comes out, he had mentioned the neighbors not being nice. So seeing that camera and the neighbors not being nice, I was like, oh, well, what do you mean? And he told me about it. And he's like, well, we got in a fight a couple weeks ago. They told me I was trespassing on their property. And he's like, but they're always playing this loud music and having these parties. And I'm like, okay. So I can tell, like, he's not comfortable here. So I get it to the point. I'm like, dude, this guy needs to move. Like, that's his best case scenario. We get the property under contract, man. And, I was super proud because, I naturally just told him what my limits were. And he's like, yeah, somebody offered me 220 2 months ago. And I said, no. I ended up putting in a contract for like 170. And I was super proud about that because, realistically, no one was going to pay that much for his house in that condition. And he needed a solution now, man. And so I remember, like, we got it done. And I was like on cloud nine. I didn't know a bunch of stuff, but I think the important thing was, like, I just committed. Like, even on the numbers, I wasn't straight, because on a foreclosure, you're going to have arrears and you're going to have the payoff. And so I was just like, well, let's just do it like this. He had wanted like some time to move out after closing. I was like, yeah, sure. We'll work that. I like hand jam something in there. Like, they'll know what I mean, and like, looking back in hindsight, I think that was one of the keys, was when I realized that I was going to help him out. I wasn't like, oh, well, I need to check with the title company and see what language I should write in here. Or let's call the bank tomorrow and get your payoff, and then we'll figure out how much to write the contract for, or like anything like that. And I just like committed and went. That's the good part. Well, the bad part's, I rent the contract for like way too low. He was supposed to get some money. I wanted him to get some money. So I'm like, oh, well, I can come up on this a little bit. So long story short, this is like a drawn out process. He's like, I think 3 weeks from auction at this point. And I'm communicating, talking with him like every day. He's not having the greatest time in life. Like, he was struggling at work and stuff like that. So we're talking about all this stuff, right? And I talked with the title company. They're like, hey, we're going to need you to amend the contract. Like, you got to amend the price, And I was like, yeah, it's no big deal. Like, I want him to get some money. So like, we'll figure it out. Right. So we'll rewrite it. So I message him and I'm like, hey, got to come by your house and we need to sign an amendment. This is just to fix it, to make sure you get the money we agreed to. I was like, this is no big deal. And he's like, okay, yeah, cool. Sounds good. And from what I remember, this was like, I think earlier in the day, or this was maybe the night before. So then the next day, I'm still in the Army at this time. So I have to wait quite literally till I get off work, which I think was like 5. And then on my way home, I was going to go get the amendment signed. And dude, I remember texting him earlier and I just had this weird feeling. You just know, like, I was just like, something's off. Like, normally he responds to me. And if he doesn't respond to me, he had a certain cadence on like when he would. And I was just like, man, something's off. So I drive over to his house, man. And his vehicle's not in the yard. We had already agreed around 5 o'clock or whatever we would meet. I was just, trying to notify him again, let him know I'm on my way. And I get there, he's not there. And everything's locked, and I hear the dogs, and I'm like, what is going on? And I call him, go home, nothing. Next day, call him, nothing. And I'm just like, oh man, it's okay. Whatever, things happen. 3 days goes by, and now his phone is like, it might not even been that long. His phone's going to voicemail. So now I'm like, uh-oh. And So I go to bed. This is 2 or 3 days after. I go to bed that night. And as you can imagine, man. So what's also happening in the backside, on these deals, we got to make money. So I'm still working my disposition of this deal. So I reach out to a friend, like this deal kind of fit like what I thought he could help me with. And man, it's looking like I'm going to make like $60K on this deal. So I'm like, holy smokes, right? So I'm like $30K in the hole. I'm looking to replenish that 30, make another 30. I am stoked, dude. So when this happens, immediately, there's like pit in my stomach. I hadn't really lost any money because I hadn't gained anything, but I had felt like, like that 60,000 is about to leave, right? And I remember going to bed whatever night I found this out, but the night before, and just like, dude, I was stressed. I was sweating it. It's all I was thinking about. And it was definitely one of those like God moments where I wake up. It's 3 a.m. I remember because I looked at my phone, and I just like remember waking up and I go, I think he got arrested. And I was just a lot of the little small things, little bits of pieces of information he had told me. And I'm like, I think he got arrested. And I remember Shelby kind of got up and she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, our seller, I think he got arrested. So I pull my phone over and I start Googling his name. Dude, sure enough, freaking Montgomery County, mugshot. And I'm like, holy smokes, he got arrested. So long story short, he's in the spat with the neighbor. Neighbor starts blasting music. He gets mad at neighbor, walks over on the neighbor's yard. They start yelling at him because he's trespassing. He decides to pee in their front yard. Then he proceeds to pee in their backyard. They call the cops. He gets arrested. So that's the story of what actually happens there, right? And how he got arrested. And so now I go into, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So I call my friend that I'm supposed to work this deal with, and he has some experience. And dude, one of the keys, like looking back in hindsight, was he had done like 100+ deals at this point. And so I had assumed, this guy is going to help me. Not to say he didn't have my best interest in his mind, in mind, but I sort of thought like, he's going to help me salvage this. He's done 100 deals. And I didn't consider maybe those 100 deals didn't really involve many off-market deals. Maybe he never dealt with the situation. Maybe his hunger and his drive did not match mine. Like maybe all these things. And so what I did was I sort of defaulted to, what he says goes, And so I call him and ask him, he's like, man, I don't know. There's not much I can do. I have an attorney friend down there. Let me call my attorney friend. And so he calls his attorney friend. There's an attorney's like, who also happened to be a real estate investor, says, I'm talking with the seller, and he ain't going to be out for a while. He's actually getting transported to Stewart County. So it turns out he got, arrested in our county for this offense, but he actually had a warrant in the next county over. So the next county over says, hey, we want him. So they took him over to their county. It was going to be 2 or 3 weeks before he saw a judge there. Then he had to get transported back to our county to see a judge for that thing that he had done. And I'm like, okay, so what does that mean? It's like, well, deal's done. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, just like that? It's like, yeah. And so I remember reaching out to the group. I didn't really ask enough questions. I did like one post, and I didn't really even check the comments. And I'll be honest, like in hindsight, I was kind of scared to ask like dumb questions, and I was like, is this a dumb question? And so I was just like, man, I just kind of like lost hope. And, I took what that investor said and was just like, yeah, that is what it is. And unfortunately now I know, being on the other side of that, like that's not true. You can get into any jail and you can get documents signed. Like there's like 3 or 4 different ways. And the fact that I literally created a brick wall and I stopped the deal there. And there's more to that I'll share in a minute, but it just kind of like blows my mind, you know? But back to the story. So I kind of just like start to pivot there and I'm like, okay, now what are we going to do? And I give up on that portion. And I say, okay, well, house is going to auction. And I remember feeling pretty conflicted. So I'm like, dude, now this guy's not going to get anything for his house. And, realistically, the deal failed, but I honestly failed him too, because me saying at that point, like, yeah, well, I guess there's no option to get him his property now. Get him his property sold now, excuse me. I guess I got to go this route. And so I was like, well, let's go the auction route. And so then I start putting a plan together to go to auction to get this property. I go to auction and bid goes up past max bid, bid one more time. And it's another investor paid it was like $228 for it. And I was just like, ugh, nope. And so that kind of closed the casket on the deal. And I think for me, the huge win there was, okay, this deal had quote unquote gone full cycle, right? Like, deal's over now. Like, I could chalk it up on my board as a lost deal. And, it felt pretty good that I had fought through to that point, and I kind of had some resolution. And, I think at that point I was able to look at it more from a different perspective. And I remember it was probably like a week later, I went back to that Facebook post, and somebody at some point before the auction had actually posted, she's like, oh, I had this happen one time. You can go do blah, 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 blah. And then you can get in there and you can get a meeting with him to sign these docs so that he can conduct his business the way he needs to, because you need a wet signature. And she's like, if that doesn't work, you can also hire an attorney to do the same thing. She's like, it's pretty straightforward. And then you can just do the closing in jail. As long as it's cleared title and everything's good to go. It's super easy. I was just like, wait, what? And dude, it just kind of like blew my mind that I had handled it the way I did. But yeah, man, I will say, like, looking back at that, you want to hear another crazy part? Were you at that? Did you go to the event in Mexico that year that we're at? I think you did. This sort of showed me that, like, you can manifest things. And I know there's like a lot of people out there like, oh, that's all woo-woo stuff. The RAS, the reticular activating system, is a real thing. And that's what I base all this off of, right? Like, that's the whole, you think of a red car, you see a red cars are everywhere, right? That's why I'm huge on this. I literally saw that play out. There's probably a recording of it. I wonder if I can get that recording. So just to kind of summarize a little bit, give a little context here. Prior to this deal, I had lost about 6 deals in total. Some of them were under contract, didn't get disposed. Some of them just under contract. And some of them hadn't quite made it to contract. I just lost the lead, but I was really close. And so I had formed this belief. I remember in hindsight, this belief was so prominent in me that I mentioned it to Mike Simmons, who is a mentor of mine. I mentioned it to Bill Allen, who's a mentor of mine, and maybe somebody else. And I just said, I feel like these deals just slipped through my hands. I don't know what to do with them, blah, 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 whatever. It was a belief that I had. So I'm kind of telling not this story, but I'm talking about this story and mentioning this at this event in Mexico. Bill actually had me on stage, and I had said something like how I didn't feel like I deserved this. And I had told Bill, yeah, man, I was struggling initially because I felt like I didn't deserve this deal. And so I just kept thinking man, this deal's not going to come to fruition, and I'm going to lose it. And I just kind of mentioned it like that. Bill literally stopped me there, and he's like, oh, cool. So you manifested that. That's why you lost that deal. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, you just said it right there. And my jaw literally dropped. I was like, wait, what? And this is like on stage in front of like 200 people, right? There's a lot of people at that event. I think there's like 200. And I'm like, wait, what? And he's like, yeah, you just said it right there. Like, that's why you lost the deal. Like, you saw what you wanted. And it just started to play back to me. And I'm like, I did. Because literally the moment that resistance came up, I was like, yeah, no, it is what it is. And that's probably the most clear memory I have of like, you know, the whole idea of manifesting things and whether it's true or not true being a thing, because I literally manifested that I was going to lose that deal, and I quite literally did lose that deal. So that was one of the huge things that I learned from this. But yeah, I mean, like that whole experience as much as it sucked, was pivotal moving forward. And the more that I grew, the more that I was really able to go back to that experience and be like, oh, yeah, I kind of saw that come into play. Like, for instance, I realized I didn't ask near enough questions. I mean, like, dude, I know now because we've done so many foreclosures. We're pretty good at them in our market. We're like the experts, right? To the point where you actually have built relationships with the trustees. I didn't even call the trustee once. I didn't notify their office. I didn't say nothing. I was just trying to beat the auction. But like, I've had conversations with them where they're like, oh, you're going to buy this house? Like, yeah, they know we're good for it. And they're just like, oh yeah, they have some flexibility on the auction day. Like I did, to the point where they're like, okay, well, you got proof of funds. And I'm like, well, can you wait for me to get the proof of funds? Like, you just send a picture of your bank account. Like, oh, okay. Like, that's how much relationships matter in this space. And I didn't explore anything with, like, I didn't ask enough questions. I didn't ask, hey, who's actually taken a foreclosure down like this? There's probably like 5 or 6 people in our group that had done it in my market at that time. Maybe not that many, but a handful. And like, yeah, man, that was another huge one too. But the more that I grow and I look back, some of these, maybe like you, some of these experience I've actually journaled about. So I go back and I just kind of laugh. It like being back in that time and what I was thinking versus how I would think about it now. And I just continue to glean more and more. But yeah, man, that was my story. What about you? What you got one?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, before we transition, like I think there's just so many takeaways from that. There's a top 10 list there of just things that you've learned that, you know, a lot of good lessons. The thing about manifestation, just to touch on that, I mean, whether you believe it or not, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It's you said it exactly. If you believe that you didn't deserve that deal, or you are constantly losing deals, you know, because that's what you do. I lose deals. Then the first time that you run into a major hurdle, you're like, okay, well, I guess this is the thing that's going to do it. As opposed to if you tell yourself the opposite is, I don't lose deals, I close deals. Now you're thinking, okay, how do I close this deal? What are all the resources at my disposal? What are all the relationships that I can tap into to get me the answers I need to close this deal? So I think that's a huge one. And I can certainly talk about, you know, my first deal and kicking off marketing, but not to get repetitive, I can fast forward a little bit in my journey after I transitioned to flipping. So I can talk about my first flip that I did actively. This was in North Carolina. There were certainly a lot of firsts with this one. First active flip. And as we talked about, I'm in my partnerships, I'm the capital partner. So I will bring my capital. I bring private lenders. I bring debt through hard money. I'm the guy with the credit. I'm good with the finances, things like that. And my partners are boots on the ground. They walk the properties, they manage the contractors and so on. So this was my first flip active as opposed to as a private lender, as a passive investor. First flip with this particular partner, obviously first flip in this market. And also unique to this deal was we bought it at auction, at an online auction. So I think this one was on maybe auction.com or ServiceLink, one of those online sites. We found it at the time. We were looking for deals. We were looking for rentals, potential flips. And we saw this one, online, and, you know, we kind of calculated our, max allowable offer based on the the rehab that we were going to have to put into it and the exit price. This house was not in a super desirable area, but the margins looked so good. The potential looked so good that we decided to go for it. My partner walked the property. Even though it was I think it was real estate owned, so it was owned by a bank. It was post foreclosure. They were auctioning it off. There was no access to it, but my partner just popped the door open. It was open, and he was able to walk it and get eyes on the condition. So that was another first. We both learned that sometimes you can do that. You certainly got to be careful. You got to know what area you're in, and you definitely want to make sure there's no squatters or a potential tenant in there, because they could be physical.
So yeah.
But so we had a really good idea of the condition. We estimated the rehab. We knew what our conservative ARV was and what we thought we were going to put into it, and so we were pretty confident putting in an offer. We ended up actually not winning that auction. Somebody else won the auction, but I was able to set on the system that we can to kind of hold our deposit in place, and we would be a backup offer. So about 3 or 4 weeks later, I got an email saying,
I'm not familiar with that process, but this is like, hey, they have a certain amount of time to close, but if they can't close, then they just go to you and they're like, hey, you're the guy, but you got to meet this, and this criteria.
Exactly. Like they can choose which backup offer to go to. Because when you go in, you submit proof of funds, you submit your entity, you submit a few other things, your preferred closing timeline, things like that. So they if they like your offer, they'll go back to you. So they did. They came back to us and said, hey, do you want to close this thing? And we did. So we went under contract. And so now we're going through this process. Now I'm having to have a lot more conversations with hard money lenders. Now I'm really ramping up talking to private lenders because we were going to bring in some private money on this as well to help with the down payment and closing costs and holding costs and all that. So this was the first private money that I'd borrowed, first hard money loan, first flip with this partner in this market. Online auction, so many firsts. Everything went really smooth until we closed on it. So we closed on this thing, and immediately my partner goes out there. He's got crews. He's, people starting to work. But he did not, at that time, he was not really set up with a lot of contractors, with good experience. And so the crew that he hired, it wasn't a GC. I don't even recall if they were licensed, and they definitely didn't have a GC license. I don't even recall if we double checked that they were insured, to be honest. So yeah, lots of mistakes made along the way, but they were actually, no, they were insured. We did make sure of that. I remember because what happened next was, they tore off the roof in order to replace it, and they didn't cover it. They left it kind of uncovered, and then a rainstorm came through and a lot of water got into
They didn't check the weather either.
Check the weather.
Oh my God.
So we ended up with water damage in there, and we ended up firing the contractor, and we were threatening to submit a claim to his insurance. We ended up deciding not to pursue it. The juice wasn't worth the squeeze for us. Because the property needed so much work anyway. I don't think it added a whole lot of additional repair work that we needed to do. But okay, so we got this started, and almost within a week, we're already kind of stalled. We have to replace the contractor, yada, yada, yada. So now along the way, we're also looking at other deals. We had other things under contract at that point. We closed on 2 more properties in rapid succession. So I think within about 3 weeks, we had purchased 3 properties because we were just gung ho. Like, we're doing this. The margins make sense. Let's go. The next decision we made, my partner was talking to this guy who's done some project management, or was a project manager and had done project management for other investors. So he's like, hey, Ron, do you think maybe we bring him on as a project manager, since we have all these properties and we want to take on more, let's have I said, okay, let's have a conversation with him. Let's talk to him, figure him out, see if it's going to be a good fit. We ended up hiring him. So we brought him on to project manage, and now close on the other 2 properties, and we just have a ton going on. For one reason or another, it definitely wasn't intentional, but this first property that we bought that was in the worst condition and needed a full rehab, roof, mechanicals, new kitchens, baths, repair water damage, some foundation issues, like all that stuff. We kind of neglected it. It was a little bit on the back burner. There was work going on there, but it wasn't our focus. And we also were getting crews that were coming through that sometimes we needed to do rework. So over the lifetime of that property, we ended up doing a lot of rework in many different areas throughout the life of the project. Fast forward, we get another 6 months, 9 months into the project. And now I'm looking at, okay, hard money's loan's going to be due in 3 months. It was a 12-month loan. We could extend it, blah, blah, blah. But like, okay, we got holding costs. We're paying interest. We got private money lenders on this. And so on and so forth. Like, okay, we need to get this done. Mind you, throughout this whole process, I think we talked about the first time I came on, I didn't have a lot of eyes on the finances and for the in-flight projects, how much we were spending on what and so on and so forth. And so costs were running up on this property. We didn't really even realize how bad it was. Like we knew we were over budget, but we didn't really have a good eye on it. So we start to pay more attention to it. Now the project manager that was helping us with the other, with all these properties wasn't effective, was not very effective at all. He was more like a helper, assistant project manager, really, because we kept having to ride, and my partner was doing a lot of it. My partner was still having to walk the properties because our project manager was a couple hours drive and we didn't want to pay mileage for him to go out to see the properties and blah, blah, blah. So hugely ineffective project manager.
What was this guy doing? Can you tell, what was his role?
His role, yeah. I mean, his role was, and we had a whole contract laid out with what his roles and responsibilities and incentives and all that shit. But basically, he was ordering materials and he was coordinating contractors and following up with contractors and getting photos when they would finish stuff and stuff like that.
He just wasn't doing a good job at it.
And we also didn't have him own the budget. Okay. He had no ownership. He had no skin in the game, and he was charging hourly.
Yeah.
So we were paying him hourly for them.
Oh,
yeah, dude. Geez. No, we made so many mistakes. And my partner and I had multiple conversations about, should we let this guy go? Like, what are we doing? And the conclusion was always like, well, did we really set him up for success? Have we really held him accountable?
Yeah.
All this and that. So for months and months, we were giving him second chances and making excuses for him and so on and so forth. So, at some point we came to the conclusion, like, okay, once we wind down with these projects, we're just not putting him on anything else. Eventually we had him just focus on this very first property that we bought at auction, because we're like, okay, this needs to get done. So that'll be the project he owns fully, and we'll fully lean on him and yada, yada. Still seeing delays, still seeing, kind of cost overruns and new things popping up that needing to be done, and so on and so forth. As we were getting nearer and nearer to the end of this project, it felt like things were starting to go even slower and slower. And one thing I didn't mention is the main contractor that we had on this had a previous relationship with this project manager as well. And so towards the end, we were wondering if there was also some kind of shady stuff going on there, with them dragging it out to both, pull a little bit more money. There was a point where the writing was definitely on the wall that we weren't going to continue with this guy. And we just wanted him to finish, because we didn't want to have to come in and, right the ship and kind of start over and lose ground. So, rightly or wrongly, more likely wrongly, we just kept assuming that it will actually be faster to just keep him on. It will finish faster just by keeping him on. And, rather than kind of having to take a few steps back by firing him. Eventually we did fire him. We ended up letting him go before the end of the project. My partner managed the project to completion. There were a couple more weeks worth of work to be done before we were going to list it. And so we hired him way too fast because we were like gung ho. We got all these properties. Let's go. We fired him way, way too slow. That's probably the biggest lesson. I mean, you've heard, hire slow, fire fast. We did the opposite, which I think is the trap that a lot of entrepreneurs fall into. So that was a big one.
Yeah. Hire fast.
Yeah.
Fire
Hire fast. Yeah. Hire fast, fire slow. Yeah.
I hire faster because I've gotten better at it. I don't think I hire too fast, but I definitely. So yeah, man, I do the same thing. And kind of to your point, in those cases, you probably were to blame for those things, because I know I am. Like I probably didn't set that person up for success. I probably didn't do a lot of the stuff I should have. Challenges is a lot of times we're like, oh, okay, well, let's just let this thing drag out then, instead of because there's a way to handle that, right? To stop, reset, and then start anew and say, hey, we're going to stop. We're going to reset. We're going to start anew, and we're going to go this way. If we don't go this way, we're going to go that way and terminate. And then depending on which way it goes, you continue mission and roll forward, and you just kind of fixed it, or you terminate, and then there's the times when you just need to flat out terminate. But at least for me, it's kind of similar to you. I'm just like, well,
it's hard though, because
nope, that never works.
It requires confrontation. It requires really frank, transparent communication, which a lot of people find very scary. I do still. I get better. I've gotten better at this over the years, but it's still challenging, right? So to do that reset, to have have that conversation about, hey, this isn't working right now. We want to make it work. Here are the parameters within which we need to operate going forward. And this is how we're going to know if we're going to be successful. And then if we don't hit those targets, then it will be very clear to everybody involved without any hurt feelings about what needs to happen next. But that is very challenging. Now, to draw a contrast to this. So, okay, I'll fast forward a little bit so we can kind of close the loop on the story. And then I want to draw a little bit of a contrast. So we ended up eventually listing the property. Now, as I said, it wasn't in a super great area. And we listed it a little bit too aggressively based on some comps and a little bit of hope. We ended up eventually, this wasn't bad because we were aggressively dropping the price. We ended up going under contract about a week ago. We ended up listing it or going under contract, actually still higher than our original ARV, way lower than our original list price. So the ARV we calculated originally, I think we figured we would be in the 150, 160 range. We ended up going under contract at 180. So definitely higher than the 160, but with a 10K seller concession at closing. So 170 basically. Yeah. So basically 170.
Holy cow. So you said just recently. Mm-hmm. Dude, that's nuts. That is an insane timeline. Meanwhile, you've done plenty of other deals.
We purchased and closed multiple other properties within that window. Now, I want to draw a contrast. So we purchased another property about 2 weeks ago. Full rehab, major project, just like this one. We brought a GC in, someone we've been working with for about 9 months to a year, who's consulted for us and who's monitored work of other crews. He's a licensed GC, good guy, knows the business, knows construction, knows the process of, permits and inspections and all that stuff. Really good guy. We put him on as the GC, a solid contract, scope of work's in there, all the parameters that, he needs to stay within, for the successful completion, draw schedule, like everything spelled out, clear communication. Within a few days, my partner sees that of starting the project after we close, my partner sees that already there's some communication breakdown. Some things he's telling us like he'll do or will get done aren't happening quickly. And mind you, this is initially really small stuff that you might let slide. Like, okay, he didn't submit for the environmental permits today. He, took him a couple more days. So okay. But we're thinking back to this first deal that took us freaking forever. And we're realizing the rework and the holding costs on the other one just completely killed us. We should have made probably 60 grand on that other one. We'll end up we'll actually, on that first one, we'll actually end up losing money on it because we went so far over budget and over time.
Yeah.
So on this one, we're staying on top of
Thank God he has so much margin though. Holy crap.
Yeah.
Wow.
On this one, on this other full rehab, we have about $60K margin if everything goes according to plan. Now, within a couple of weeks, within a few days, my partner sees his problems. And within about 10 days, he informs me like, hey, Ron, we're having problems. So he didn't, and I love my partner how early and often he communicates. He's been fantastic. And so, we started getting on calls. Like I started getting added to calls with the GC, talking about the project and what needs to happen next. And we're having delays with permits and why, and problem solving and all that stuff. And, a few days, and I'm like, okay, this looks like it can potentially work. It's not the best. I think we talked about this, offline, you and I. We're thinking, okay, well, we can probably limp this project along. I think it'll be successful, and then we probably won't use them forever. So, but we can still use this. But within a few days, we realized, actually, no, this is not working. It's not going to work. He sent us an invoice, not an invoice. He sent us basically like a suspension letter saying, we're behind on payments of this, blah, 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 blah. He wasn't conforming to, he can't bill or invoice us for work that's not fully completed because we can't get our calls from hard money until things are fully completed. He's supposed to invoice by Wednesday of each week in order to get paid by Friday. That was the agreement. He sends us an email, I think Friday night or Saturday morning saying and even in the invoice or in the letter, he references that he's supposed to invoice by Wednesday to get paid Friday. And yet he's still asking to be paid immediately. It didn't make sense. So my partner and I got on a call with him on, Sunday and just to hear him out, hear what he has to say about that. And then the three of us and we knew we were going to terminate at that point. We had already drafted the termination letter and all that. But we still were going to give him a chance to tell us what's going on. We pressed him on some of the points, and then he himself said, okay, guys, let's just not do this. We've terminated him, and we're already, working with kind of some of our backup GCs to go out there and, give us estimates and all that. So we hired him much slower, bring him on as a full GC owning a project. And we fired him, I think, very fast. I'm very proud of the team for doing that.
Dude, that's awesome. And, looking at it, if you're just listening here on result, sounds like, oh man, that didn't quite work out. But it's no, man, apples to apples, take that experience and then compare it to the first experience. Look at your guys' progress. I mean, you personally, your own progress. Look at between you and your partner and how you guys decided together. And it sounds like from the get-go, you even started out on a better foot, with a better, you had a better opportunity selecting the second guy than the first guy, albeit didn't work out. Yep. Got it. But you've at least refined your criteria on it that much more. And, we're talking, longer time horizon. This isn't month 2 here. But that's all the progress, right? You've worked with other GCs or worked with other contractors. And so, man, that's really cool to hear. Why would you, continuing on, why would you look to hire, or maybe you are, a GC in lieu of a project manager? Just out of curiosity, in the beginning, why were you guys going sort of that project manager route? Because you guys had divided duties, right? And it sounds like the duty of your partner should have been the project manager stuff, right? Ordering materials, checking work, making sure that you're remaining within budget, all that sort of stuff. What has changed? Or I was just out of curiosity, why did y'all go that route?
Originally hiring the project manager?
Yeah.
Just to be able to go even faster. My partner, even himself, had limited bandwidth. He was running a separate business. We were both running, other businesses other than this particular flipping partnership. And so we figured 3 projects was probably his cap at his capacity. And we wanted to be able to do even more. Now, granted, that was illogical because we hadn't even gone full cycle on a single deal. Like,
yeah, you're scaling something that
exactly.
didn't
We were
exist.
scaling something that we hadn't proved it end to end. And so it's just more like gung ho, let's fucking do this. Let's go. We're what is that? Move fast and break things. Highly ill-advised, in my opinion. If I had run other multiple successful or even one really successful flipping partnership or flipping company and I'd learned all the lessons and would know all the things to look out for, maybe I would try to scale a new one relatively quickly. But I hadn't even done that.
Well, because you have something to build up of, right? Like, when I think about what I'm doing with my cleaning company, for instance, when we'll go through these bouts where I call them scaling and stabilizing. I'm like, hey, listen, guys, we're not trying to grow revenue. Here's what we're focusing on. And then there's other moments where I'm like, why don't we have new hires? Like, where are our new sales this week? And it's just, I think, understanding why you're doing what you're doing. And so for us, like, why would we be stabilizing? It's like, well, because we're building something out. Like, I don't know if it's going to work. I think it's going to work, but I'm not quite sure. I need to build it out. I need to test it a little bit. And then like when we're scaling, it's like, well, what am I scaling? Well, it's something that's already proved out. Like, our from beginning to end, the way that we hire cleaning team members, I wasn't trying to scale that thing before it was built out. And this is unintentional. I didn't know this. This is just in hindsight. Right? But what I realized in hindsight was I was so focused on building it and making something sustainable that it kind of saved us, because the next thing you knew, I started comparing like our turnover rates. I started comparing, from end to end, how quick we could push a certain volume through our pipeline to like other companies. And I was like, oh, we must have something good here because our numbers look good compared to what's normal. And that's, we kind of built off that. So I think that's a good observation for sure. And I don't know, it's really easy to do. Sometimes like it's easy to get ahead of ourselves, especially if you're a thinker like me. I'm a thinker. I'm like, I call it building assumptions on assumptions.
There you go.
Right. So like I make an assumption and then I'm like, oh no, but that assumption's fact, but it's not fact. And then I put another assumption on top of it and then another one. And then that first assumption I made turns out was wrong. So then, it's
all just fantasy at that point.
My whole building just
logical
falls to the ground because it was built on nothing.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, a logical house of cards. I love that, dude. Yeah, pretty much. Well, I love it, man. Well, this was fun talking about sort of how first can shape you and the power of them. And I don't know, similar. I think your story is similar to mine. It's more so about like what that thing taught you for the future and less about that thing itself, right? So like your first flip, similar to like that deal I talked about, man, it was less about the $60,000 that I needed to make and more about the fact that it gave me confidence. Later on, I was able to like reflect back on that to save me in other situations like that, mostly that pertain around foreclosures, so on and so forth. Like that's the true power of like those firsts. I think I kind of heard that in your story as well, right?
Yeah, I'm completely. And I think this goes back to, I think something that people in our community talk a lot about, and something you reminded me of a few months ago when I was struggling, which is you only fail if you quit, right? You only lose if you stop, right? And because if you don't stop, then you're able to leverage the power of all those lessons you learned along the way and parlay them into, and by the way, the relationships too, like you talked about with foreclosures. Now you have relationships with the trustees, and that opens huge doors for you. That gives you tremendous leverage to get deals you would not have been able to do when you were first starting, because those relationships just didn't exist. And so you're able to kind of build on mistakes and build on past successes as well, and just get better and build bigger things.
Yeah, for sure. Cool, man. Well, on that note, Ron, once again, thank you for joining me. Until next time.